Thank you for that prayer. Thank you for that drosh. I like to, where are you? Oh, there he is. Yeah. I like to imagine that every week you're prepared with a drosh, like just in case. You know, that's how I feel today. This teaching that I'm giving you guys today, it's something I've been working on for about 12 years, I'd say, and just kind of always had it ready. I'd run through it dozens of times in my head, but I was asked to step in, and I said, all right, well, here's what my topic is, and I don't know, honestly, how well this will land. I don't see myself as a very spiritual leader in that way. I don't speak the language as well as some of our other leaders do. I have a different way of conceptualizing things, but we'll get through it together. So you'll notice the title is A Logos on Community, Part 1, Forgiveness. The discerning ones among you might notice that Part 1 implies something, right? This is going to be a 3-part sermon. Not today. Just we're doing one part today, but you'll see a little bit more of me, assuming this goes well. So, but this is a logos on community. So logos, in this context, I'm using Aristotle's pillars of persuasion, logos, ethos, pathos. And logos is using a rational argument to persuade, to make a persuasive argument, using rationality to make a persuasive argument. And there's a reason why I'm doing that. We know that rationality, I think we know this, right? That rationality is not sufficient to understand God and his ways, right? Like it's beyond, like we know this. His ways are beyond our ways. We're not ever going to fully, I think, grasp things the way he does. Maybe my theology is a little off on that, but I don't, certainly not in this lifetime. And what do we do with that, right? You lean not on your own understanding, so I get that. But a lot of the teachings seem to imply that we have to develop some kind of understanding and a leaning onto his word. So what I do with that, what I've started to do with that is treat rational exploration as an act of worship. So, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. If we can go to the next slide. We can, I think, find reflections of truth in God's creation. Is anybody with me on this? Does this make sense? Okay. So folks that don't even know God or know his word can stumble into truth, right? And I think that's really cool when that happens. And I like to grab onto that, because what that does for me is it gives me maybe like a different perspective that I haven't had as a believer on a concept that God has told us is important because he's teaching it to us. It's in his word. So what's this other angle that somebody's come at it from? Anchoring myself in God's word. We're never departing from that. But I use this word test. And when I had Rachel review my notes, and she said, be careful with that word test, because we're not trying to validate God's word through rational exploration or any sort of rational thought, right? But we're I want to say playing with it, and I don't know if that's the right word, but maybe it'll make sense in a second. So can we jump to Romans 1:20? So this is kind of what I'm leading on for this from Scripture. There's it's hard to find something really direct that connects to what I'm talking about, but this one I think comes pretty close. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. So, we got verses like that. And if we can go back to the previous slide, even the very rocks will cry out. Like we've got these examples of his creation being a way to know him. At least that's how I'm thinking of it. So what I want to do is I want to do a thought experiment with us. I want to do how many people have heard of the flatland thought experiment? Nobody. Rachel has. So Rachel signed off on this, but she said, be careful. So what I like to do with it is I like to use Mario. So at least how many people know Mario? Super Mario, Mario and Luigi? Thank you. Okay, this will help. So the flatland thought experiment is intended to help physicists, typically theoretical physicists, try to understand higher dimensions, because they're able to at least they think, do certain proofs that prove these higher dimensions, but you know, what do we know? We live in this box, right? We live in this three-dimensional box. But the flatland experiment is fascinating. So what you do is you try to imagine yourself in a two-dimensional space, and how would you experience a third dimension if you lived in that space, right? All right, I'm not going to do that with you guys, but what I want to do is imagine Mario in his world gaining some kind of sentience, gaining some kind of understanding of the fact that, like, you know, he's in a space, right? He's in a two-dimensional space, and maybe he starts to study, you know, some of the physics of that space, study light, the behavior of the sun, you know, the way that, like, if he goes in these tunnels, he like pops up somewhere else. And maybe he starts to develop hypotheses and be able to predict what he's doing, and you know, and he finds these predictive patterns, and begins to understand more and more. But what we know, being outside of Mario's world, is that he just has no idea. Like, he's really maybe gaining an understanding of his space, but could he imagine, you know, in this thought experiment, could he imagine like what we're doing here? You know what I mean? Could he imagine like being able to go back and forth and not just side to side and up and down? I don't think it's possible. And so I say all that to say, yes, absolutely, God's ways are well beyond our ways, right? We're not going to understand, but that doesn't mean that, like, he doesn't turn off our brains, right? So I want to approach this type of teaching that I'm doing today as an act of worship, and I want to bring you guys along with me. That's the goal of it. I don't want to give you guys the impression that I'm trying to justify God's word through these rational arguments. It's more like, you know, it just dawned on me. It's more like this used to be popular in the 90s, those magic eye pictures. Do you guys remember those? Anybody? Like, it's kind of like that to me, where like, you know, his ways are above our ways. Like, I just see static chaos, right? But oh, you get a certain perspective and something pops out. So that's what it's like to me. But to kind of take it to another level, if we can go to the next slide, or next, not verse slide. Yeah, there we go. So I also see this as a father. And I think we got fathers in here. I know, like, I see Zach. I see, hi, visitors. There's fathers here. So the act of worship of this, to me, comes from my experience as a father, where I'm trying to teach my kids how to behave and how to deal with reality sometimes. Like, maybe there's a bully, and that's tricky to know how to deal with as a kid, but I tell them, you know, just ignore the bully. Like, it doesn't make sense. Like, I know you can't comprehend it, but try it. Just try it. Trust me. And, you know, they do it, and it works. Well, that's cool. And then they're like, oh, Dad, that worked. And that feels cool, right? Sorry, whoa. That feels cool. I'm happy for you, that worked, and I'm glad you trusted me. That's one level. But then maybe later, and my oldest is starting to do this. He's 10, right? Some of you know Edward. He's got a lot of thoughts. And he comes to me and he's like, so why does this work? Oh, that's another level. That's fun. That's relational. You know, he's trying to understand my thinking on a deeper level. That's pretty cool. I like to imagine that God has that same experience of us when we really dive in to something and really try to understand. Like, it's good and sufficient for us to accept his word, right? Like, trust him. That's good. So it's not necessary. I'm not trying to say it's required that we then take it to that next level, that you have to really seek and really dive in and try to understand. But I want to consider it an act of worship. So yeah, that's kind of just laying the foundation of what I'm going to be trying to do over these next 3 sermons is play around in the space where we're trying to adopt some new perspectives. We're trying to gain maybe a deeper understanding of things that we've been instructed to do, all within the context of community, because this is an awesome community. We're in unique times, and so I think there might be some good that we could get out of this, or at least I hope so. So anyway, next slide. I'm gonna. So nobody knew Flatland. How many people know game theory? 1. We've improved. We're all gonna know game theory after today. It's very simple. And I'm gonna spend a little time in this. Game theory is another thought experiment. This one is more in like the social sciences realm, so it's more in my comfort zone. Those of you that know me know I've been a therapist for a long time. So this is more my space. This is my speed, and I'm gonna have fun with this. I'm hoping you guys have fun too, but I'm gonna start having fun. I might start dancing a little bit. This is really interesting stuff. So game theory, what it does is this. Okay, so imagine how complex is a person? Just one person, super complex. How complex are their behaviors and their thoughts? It's real complex. And you take two people, put them together, make them interact. How complex is that interaction? It's like complex squared, right? It's a lot. What game theory tries to do is it tries to distill that down to a very simple to understand framework that then allows us to kind of study or play around with ideas about how those interactions occur. It kind of strips away the complexity, it oversimplifies it, but it gives us a space by which, it comes to our level, kind of like how I try to bring it to my kids' level when I'm trying to teach them things, right? I think game theory brings it down to our level. And so all it is a gamification of how people interact and the decisions they make on how they interact, what causes them to make the decisions they make when they interact. So imagine, if you will, just if we go to the next slide, I have a visual for this. So imagine like this is you on one side and maybe like a baker on the other side. So you're going to a bakery, okay? And you have a choice when you go to that bakery. You can either cooperate or you can defect. Those are broadly the two choices. Cooperate means like maybe you go to the bakery and you grab a loaf of bread and you take it up to the counter and you try to pay for it, right? And maybe the baker cooperates by taking your money, giving you the bread, and everybody goes their way, and kind of it's a win-win, right? Everybody really gets what they want. The baker loses some bread, you lose some money, so it's not perfect. It's not optimized for the individual, but it's a good scenario. Or you can imagine, you see there's some numbers there in the middle, so that game theory allows, like, it gives us the ability to maybe put some points to that reflect the benefits and the cost of those decisions. The other decisions we can make, maybe it's you and the baker, and you decide, I'm gonna steal this bread, right? And the baker never finds out. Well, that's an optimal strategy for you, rationally, not morally. We're not talking morally, just rationally. That's an optimal strategy. You get bread and you didn't have to lose anything for it. The baker loses. The baker gets 0, you get 5. Or maybe the baker sells you some really, really bad bread. You can't even eat it. Well, then he gets 5 points out of that, you get 0. The other scenario is both of you defect. You try to steal the bread. Maybe the baker calls the police on you, you go to jail. He still loses bread, you lose freedom. Not an optimal strategy for either person, but maybe you got a couple bites of bread before you went to jail, so you get 1 point, and maybe he gets a sense of justice or a reputation that you can't steal from this bakery, so he gets a point as well. Anyway, so we've got this point system based on just this matrix of choices, either cooperating or defecting. So now let's take this to another level. If we can go back to the previous slide, this kind of scenario that I'm talking about, this is just one encounter between two people, and it's already getting a little complex, isn't it? Like, it's getting hard to understand. This is why I enjoy game theory. Like, even though we're distilling it down, it's still complex. But now, here's what makes it even more complex. Even if that strategy, the optimal rational strategy, is to defect, I think what starts to jump out to any of us when we start to think about it is, imagine what happens if you iterate that encounter, if you repeat that encounter 200 times. So you're going to go to this baker over and over and over and over and over and over. Does defecting still remain the optimal strategy? Well, let's find out. So this is fun. Axelrod's tournaments. So what Axelrod did, Axelrod is a social scientist, and he commissioned programmers to develop code algorithms of strategies for this environment, for this cooperation and defection environment. And he got a dozen strategies together, and he pit them all against each other, over 200 encounters on each of them, and try to see who got the best score. Remember those scores? There was maybe like a 3 if you both cooperate, or a 5 if you defect and they don't. Which strategy was really the optimal strategy? Which got the most points? And he pit them all against each other in a sort of a tournament style. And there was a lot of different strategies. Like, some of them were very generous, like I'm just going to cooperate the whole time, no matter what. And some of them were a little more pessimistic, like I'm going to start cooperating, but as soon as you defect, I'm going to defect, and then I'm just going to defect for the whole rest, like every single encounter going forward, like no forgiveness, right? You're just, no forgiveness. So, and some of the strategies were sneakier, like I'm going to cooperate for a while, but like 30, 40 rounds in, I'm going to defect and just kind of see how you respond. And then I'm going to try to see if I can manipulate that more. I'm going to maybe throw in some more defections and see if I can take advantage of your cooperation. So all these different strategies, all these algorithms were put together. They were pitted against each other. The one that rose up to the top as the winner was called tit for tat. That's what the strategy was called. Very simple strategy. It was one of the simplest codes that was provided. All it did is it starts out as cooperation, and then it mirrors its opponent's or partner's previous move. So if in that first round everybody cooperates, that's great. Tit for tat cooperates in the second round, in the third round, fourth round. But as soon as the other strategy defects, in the very next round, tit for tat defects. But if the opponent cooperates again after that, so does tit for tat. So there's forgiveness. And after a fashion, right? Like there's at least a returning to cooperation. We're not saying no forever, right, in that strategy. And I see this, if we can go to Exodus 21:24 and Deuteronomy, I see this kind of strategy in the Old Testament, I think. This is like eye for an eye. Like if you harm me, I'm going to harm you, but then we'll call it square, right? Then we're done. Then we try to go back. So I see that. This is what I see. And what's interesting about this study as well is not only did this strategy rise to the top of all the strategies, it had the most points, but all of the more forgiving strategies were in the top 50%. The bottom 50% were all the very unforgiving, ungraceful strategies. Very interesting. So that begged the question, if we could go back to that, actually no, maybe we go to the next slide. Sorry. Yeah, one more. One more. Yeah. So it begged the question, what happens if, we misinterpret what happened? Like the other person thought they were cooperating, but we read it as a defection. So maybe like they didn't, they meant to say something and they thought they were being nice, or they thought maybe they were doing us a favor, but we read it as, they're being mean or something. They're trying to harm us, right? There's that noise. I'm calling that noise. I didn't call that noise. They called it noise. And how does that change the strategies then? Like, it seems on the face of it, in just a single encounter, maybe just a couple encounters, it seems a little unjust if there's just a perceived slight and then we respond to that in kind. Like that, to me, that feels not just, because that other person didn't actually do anything. It's just, it was perceived as wrong. So really, I think this is really fascinating. So did Axelrod. Axelrod's like, that's a really interesting question. Let's retest. Everybody submit new strategies, right? And he got even more buy-in this time. He let, in the first round, first iteration of this, he only had 12 programmers jump in. This time he had a couple dozen. All these other strategies started presenting. And I'm not surprised. I doubt you're surprised, but the strategy that rose to the top was the winningest strategy with noise was called generous tit for tat. It took tit for tat to another level of grace, of forgiveness. It didn't start defecting just after one defection from its opponent. It would give it a couple iterations of defection before it would start to then defect. But as soon as it returned to cooperation, generous tit for tat returned to cooperation. So it had a little more resilience against, that defection from their opponent. Am I crazy, or does that sound like Yeshua? Sounds like his teachings. Am I and this isn't coming, these aren't spiritual people doing these experiments, but, can we go to, I think we have a couple verses for this. Yeah. Oh, maybe not. All right, we'll have verses later. Let's go back a slide. And I want to give, so we've been in this thought experiment space, in this game theory space. I want to bring it back to reality for a second. Like, how does this work in the real world? I have a real world example for you guys. How many of you, I'm going to just keep asking because I'm not sure at this point, how many of you know about the Cuban Missile Crisis? Good. Okay. I don't have to explain that one. I knew you guys do it. I'm sorry. So I'm not going to go into all the details about what was going on at that time. I'm going to assume that for the most part we know, but it was, more or less there was a cold conflict in the Gulf, right? I think we call it the Gulf of America now, but at the time it was the Gulf of Mexico. And, it was kind of a standoff between our Navy, the US Navy, and the Soviet Navy. That's all we need to know at this point. Now what happened, there's a lot of stories that come out of the Cold War that are really fascinating to me. If you guys haven't ever looked into some of the history of that, God's hand was in that conflict, like preserved us a couple different ways. But this is one of them. There's a Soviet submarine kind of under the water, as submarines are wont to do, and they lose radio contact with Moscow. They're not sure what's going on. A couple days are going by. It starts to get hot in that sub. There's a little more like electrical failure. It's getting real hot. The air system's failing. The CO levels are rising, CO2 levels. And that's not very good. That's not very fun. The Russians are not having it, but they don't want to go up because they know there's, the US Navy up there. So, another day or two goes by, what happens? The US Navy's like, we think we see some subs down there. And it was apparently standard practice. I don't know if there's anybody that was in the Navy at the time, but apparently it was standard practice to drop some practice depth charges as a signal to be like, hey, I see you. How about you come back up, come up to the surface so we can talk? I don't know. And not fight. So the US Navy starts doing that. Well, these Russians in this submarine who don't have radio contact with Moscow, they have no idea what's going on, and they're starting to, not feel it anymore, like it's getting hot. Well, they start thinking, hey, this feels like war. This feels like battle started, right? And I don't think they're like fully thinking straight either. Like it's been hot. It's been, a lot of CO2, whatever. But we think this is war. And so the captain, the number one captain, I'm not going to say this right, Savitsky, says we need to launch our nukes at the US right now. And the political officer on board says, yes, I agree. Launch the nukes. Let's kick this off, right? Thankfully, protocol at the time for the Russian Navy was we need 3 unanimous yeses from the officers. And one officer, Vasily Arkhipov, I'm not going to say it right, but this guy is a hero, true hero. He says no. He says we should just rise, we should go up to the surface, see what's going on, try to establish radio contact. We don't want to fire off those nukes. And so what did they do? That's what they did. They calmly argued for a little while. The explosions kept happening. They decided to go up to the surface. And as we know, nuclear war did not happen, right? He chose to see through the noise of that moment. The US Navy was not attacking that sub, but that sub thought they were being attacked, and they almost retaliated. They almost did not see through that noise. So next slide, please. This is where I think we think about forgiveness in this almost rational way, where as Yeshua commands us, if we can go to Matthew 5:38, you have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Well, we just heard that. But I tell you not to resist an evil person, but whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. If anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. I don't know about you guys. That's been a hard one to really wrap my head around. Like, I'm a therapist, and I'm like, I know that's not an optimal strategy for a lot of people, but I get what he's trying to say here. I think I get what he's saying. Because what would have happened? What would have happened if that third officer agreed and said, we need to retaliate? What happens in that original tit-for-tat strategy? What's interesting is that original tit-for-tat strategy, not the generous one, the original one, when noise was introduced into that scenario, when the occasional random defection was introduced, tit-for-tat would, in a lot of cases, a lot more often, devolve into just defection with their opponent. Like they would just get each other into that space, right? And just over and over and over, they would not cooperate. And I think sometimes our relationships get like that too, or maybe like our politics gets like that sometimes, or maybe our international relationships get like that, where it's just, we cannot get along. We don't cooperate. We just keep, throwing darts at each other or something. So, and I think we have another verse too. I just want to drive this home a little bit. Whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away. So, if we can go to the next slide. Practical application to this. So, as I've said enough times already, I've been a therapist for a while. Any therapist worth their salt is going, if you're coming to a therapist for, some personal issues or relational issues, one of the things that they will probably work with you on is forgiveness, right? If, depending on the issue, but especially if it's interpersonal or trauma related, forgiveness is part of it, but it's always paired with boundaries, right? So what Yeshua was saying, it didn't sound like we were talking about boundaries, right? But I still have the sense that they're there, and we're going to see some verses in a little bit that highlight that. But forgiveness paired with boundaries is what brings healing. So that forgiveness, that grace, that not letting yourself get sucked into an endless pattern of defection, of non-cooperation. Forgiveness is what's needed to pull us out of that, or to prevent us from getting into that kind of cycle. Can we go to that Proverbs? He who walks with wise men will be wise, but the companion of fools will be destroyed. That sounds a little bit like boundaries to me, but can we go to the next verse? Moreover, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he hears you, you have gained your brother. But if he will not hear, take with you 1 or 2 more, that by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, every word may be established. Next slide. And if he refuses to hear them, tell it to the church or, synagogue. But if he refuses even to hear the church, let him be to you like a heathen and a tax collector. That sounds like boundaries to me. Let him be to you as a heathen or a tax collector. To my Republican friends, let him be to you as a Democrat. To my Democrat friends, let him to be you as a Republican, right? To my Libertarian friends, let him be to you as another Libertarian. That sounds like boundaries to me. So we have forgiveness and we have boundaries. So what do we do with all this? And I'm wrapping up, I promise. I think we have another slide, right? I want to talk about our community. What is the practical application for what I'm trying to bring across to you guys? I view what we're trying to do here as something worth investing in, right? We're building something here that ideally will be a good return on investment, right? We're sacrificing time, we tithe, we show up, we gather together, and we do it in part because I think God told us to, but we also like it. I think we like each other. But I also think there's something more to it, and I'm going to talk about that in my 3rd sermon, not today, but there's more. I think there's more to it, or maybe in addition to it. But I want to conceptualize forgiveness as fertilizer for the soil. So what we're trying to grow here, the amount of it and the quality of it, I think is going to be dependent on how we practice forgiveness and grace in our community especially. But this is true in your own life, I imagine, as well. So can we go to Ephesians 4:32? And to be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, even as God and Messiah forgave you. One more verse. Bearing with one another and forgiving one another. If anyone has a complaint against another, even as Messiah forgave you, so you also must do. I'm thinking of this as not just that one interaction of either cooperation or defection, but an attitude, a strategy, a generous tit-for-tat strategy of how we deal with community, how we deal with each other, how we deal with others in our lives. Let forgiveness and grace be your guiding principle. Is there any more slides after this? Wow, yeah. And then let boundaries also be a part of the equation. Small slights can choke growth if we allow it, right? That's the fertilizer. But with it, community thrives, with forgiveness. A couple more verses. If you forgive men their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive men their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. If you aren't sold yet on forgiveness, yeah, there it is. Then Peter came to him and said, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Up to 7 times? And Yeshua said to him, I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. This is to me not, this isn't a math conversation that I don't think he's having. We know this. I think he's talking about strategy. I think he's talking about intentional choice. How we bring ourselves to community. Grace. And again, not toxic grace, not toxic forgiveness. Boundaries still. So my call to action for you guys. Has there been noise? Like, I think this is what I hope has kind of popped out through our thought experiments, is this idea of noise. We know we need to forgive people, and hopefully we're practicing that. But I don't know that we've really thought about how noise can factor into that. So I want you to think about, how has it possibly been noise, perceived slights, unintended slights, that has affected your engagement with this community or your engagement with others outside of this community? I mean, let it take you everywhere, but I'm over the next 3 sermons talking about this community. And that's my call to action to you guys. All right, well, that's it. That's all I got to say. Worship leaders, come up. Thank you guys.